August the 13th, Friday, 1999. People have love, luck and joy everywhere. So may it be done!
I would not get a haircut on Friday the 13th because I thought while I had that haircut that was done on the 13th, I would be having a bad luck. I may be run over by a car, I may be mugged, assaulted.
I broke my back in two places, and now I have just a little kink in my spine.
At one time I used to take every Friday the 13th off work and arrange to have that day off, working on the principle if you're not doing anything, it can't go wrong.
Friday the 13th can serve to encapsulate for the individual everything that could, may and will go wrong, not just to them and in their lives, but to the whole world.
Time.
8 people have been killed in severe storms sweeping across the country. In North Yorkshire, gale force winds of up to 80 miles an hour have caused extensive damage to property and uprooted hundreds of trees.
Friday the 13th, really, it didn't worry me. So I wasn't really aware of it. It wasn't a special day or anything. It is now, of course. I woke up and it sounded windy, but not too bad. The house itself wasn't in an exposed place. It was quite sheltered. So I was very surprised when the barn blew down. And I went outside, and when I got outside I saw that there were tiles on the floor, and I looked up at the mill house roof, and there was a hole in the roof where the wind had blown the tiles off. I hopped in the car, pulled out of the gate, and I was about to go up the hill. I saw the front wall had been blown down.
I usually cycle to work, but it being so windy, I decided that I would walk because I thought the wind might blow me off my bike, to be honest.
Well, I don't normally pick up hitchhikers or passengers, but I felt so sorry for him because it was really an awful day. I mean, it was really cold, and the wind and the rain, and he looked so pathetic.
So I set off to work, and I was quite pleased when a chappie that I didn't know stopped to offer me a lift.
I knew where he worked, so it wasn't going out of my way, so I just felt sorry for him and picked him up. I think he probably wished I hadn't now.
We saw a tree fall over, which you don't see very often, and we were just reversing to try and take another route. As
I reversed, I did a three-point turn, or intended to do a three-point turn in the road, but only got halfway around when this crack and I suppose a whooshing sound, and I found I was surrounded by branches and trees. And
my first recollection really was putting my hands up and finding that there was a tree across my shoulders and feeling the bark of the tree and perhaps seeing a few tatters of the canvas top to the Land Rover around my ears.
He was bent over with his head down, and the tree was lying across his head and diagonally across the car. He was just sat slumped with his head forward, and so I knew he wasn't very well. Looking over to the right, I couldn't obviously see straight across the car anymore, but I could see Ted's feet departing from the driver's side. The initial knock on my head must have fractured my skull, because the fracture started from about my right ear to nearly to my left ear, straight across the top. I broke my back in two places, and now I have just a little kink in my spine where a couple of vertebrae pushed out. I broke, I think, 4 or 5 ribs. I don't think they were too worried about those when I was in hospital, but 4 or 5 ribs were sort of squashed and moved up a little bit on my left-hand side, and now I don't have quite so much
bone support there, so the muscles have to do a little bit extra work.
Friday is the 5th day of the week, and number 5 is the number for movement and change. Because it falls in the middle of the number 1 to 9 sequence, it can bring up general changes in life and unexpected events even. And when you couple that with the number 13, 13 potentially being to do with big transformation and change, you can see how people might get a little nervous to go out on Friday the 13th. But 5 has positive elements, which is communication and self-expression. It gets things moving where things have got stuck, and the number 13 adds up to a 4, which is to do with grounding things, materializing things. So it's a great time to perhaps materialize and discuss ideas that you want to get done.
Did I say that? I seem to remember saying
yeah.
that I think we'll have to go the long way around.
That's right, yeah. And I just thought, you know, a tree falling in front of us, remarkable, but nothing, you know, nothing else is going to happen. And then, obviously, the next thing I know, we were sort of into the verge there, and it hit me from hit us from behind. Yeah. And
I think it was somewhere about here, really.
Just somewhere about here, I think.
Yeah, it's difficult to call because it's changed quite a bit, but...
I kind of gradually regained conscious thought in Pinderfields, and one of my first memories, I think, is opening or having your card to me opened, and I remember on the front there were like a couple of crows, I think, and one had got a bent beak.
Oh, really?
And the card said, sorry to hear your little pecker's bent, and best wishes from Ted and Val. It was our Land Rover you were in. Right. And that's one of the first memories that I've got.
I don't remember the card at all, really.
I've still got it.
Have you?
Yeah.
Oh, right. And are there any lasting problems?
No. I say I actually consider myself very lucky that I can still walk, because there's very many people that have broken the back of car.
As a mathematician, I'm not actually terribly impressed by numerology. Numbers are very interesting, but I don't think they have significance for human activities in any way. And if you just sit back and take a kind of dispassionate look at the statistics for disasters, Friday the 13th is no worse, but also no better than anything else. So from that point of view, there's no reason to suppose it's special. And I think what people do, if you're interested in the number 13 and a bit worried about it, whenever something nasty happens on Friday the 13th, you say, see, I told you so. But if something nasty happens on a different day, you don't say, whoops, I was wrong.
I worked in Libya on petrochemical complexes with a number of my colleagues. I was travelling to Heathrow, where we were going to meet up. It was Friday the 13th, and we were flying out that day to go back to work. There's a crew of us, approximately 12 or 13. Quite normal, a couple of drinks on the plane. Flight went okay, apart from a couple of guys getting rather drunk. Get the first passport check, and guys looking through my passport, looking at the visa. He initially looked at the correct page, or at least what I thought was the correct page, and he kept checking the other pages because he felt there was something wrong. He couldn't speak English, so he couldn't tell me. The passport was then taken away and taken into an office, and I was just told to wait. You get nervous when you're waiting because you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know why the passport's been taken, what reason, whatever. So after a while, I think it was about an hour, case of knocking the door and asking politely when I was called in, what's the problem? As you entered the door, immediately to the right was a desk. On that desk was my passport. Behind the desk then was sitting the gentleman, and on the desk also was a gun, which again wasn't unusual. Everybody carried guns. All the security, depending what security they were, whether it was a handgun or Kalashnikov or something like that. So you were used to seeing guns. It wasn't a huge room, it was just a small office room, like an ante-room that they just used for checking things out and where they were based. And that's when the gun was picked up and pointed at me. And that's when you realise that, again, anything could happen. When someone confronts you with a revolver, it feels very lonely. Time does seem to go slow. I don't know if you think or if you just react. possibly just react to the incident. So all you want to do is get as far away from it as possible. Then sitting down, you start thinking over, and I think that's when all these kind of sequences start to come into your mind then. You know, it's Friday, it's the 13th, it's gate 13, the 103. It's not until something like that happens, then you start to think, you're putting things together, whether it's logical or not is another thing, but it does start all piecing together.
Thank you for your cooperation.
There is a concept called selective attention. Selective attention is the carefully filtering out of certain events and experiences in one's life to pay particular attention to. And by definition, the selecting of other events and experiences to not pay attention to. How we make this filtering, how we go through this process of filtering out information, is dependent upon our situation and our circumstances. And on Friday the 13th, it would appear that some people are more prone to filter out the positive and look only at the negative. Hence, they see more negative experiences occurring on that day.
Before that, Friday the 13th was just another day. In fact, it was Friday the 13th. It was immaterial. It was a Friday. It just happened to be a 13. Nothing ever happened. But then something happened. When something like that happens, you do tend to treat things slightly differently. And that's why it's simply what happened that day. I just don't like that day. Not comfortable.
Now going to look at a chart for Dennis, who I believe had an unfortunate incident a while back, and he's trying to work out why. It happened on Friday the 13th. So he's called Dennis, and Dennis's name adds up to a 29 or 11, 2, and his date of birth is the 18th of May 1950. So we're going to add this up now. 18 plus 5, 23, plus 1 plus 9 plus 5, 11, 2. The first thing I notice about Dennis's chart is that his name number, or his first name number, and his life path number are both 11s. They both add up to an 11, 2. And 11 influences nervous energy, makes you feel jumpy, and although it means that Dennis is obviously very sensitive and takes things to heart, it can also be difficult to handle at times, particularly if he's gone through a major trauma, which is what happened on Friday the 13th of April 1984. The 13th of April 1984 adds up to a 39, which then adds up to a 12 or a 3. This number highlights the need to learn to let go and let life flow, and in fact it's teaching all of us, this number 3, that when things happen to us in our lives, it's actually about learning what we need to from that situation at the time in order to strengthen us, so then we can allow our lives to flow again.
At one time I used to take every Friday the 13th off work. I'd arranged to have that day off, working on the principle if you're not doing anything it can't go wrong. Try and keep anything to a minimum. Try not to do too much. If you could cancel the whole day and stay at home, then why not? If you can't, then you do the minimum you can and fit anything else in then the following day or the day before. If someone banned them from the calendar, we'd be quite happy. For me, I thought I was unlucky at the time. Other people talking to me since, they seem to think I was fortunate. I was deported on the Saturday and there were hostages taken on the Sunday from that airport. So which way does it go? I still feel uncomfortable on Friday the 13th.
The Gregorian calendar, this is the one we use, repeats the same pattern every 400 years. And because of that, it turns out that the 13th of the month is much more likely to be a Friday than any other day, that every year has at least one Friday the 13th. It could have 1, it could have 2, it could have 3, it cannot have more. And if a year's got 3 Friday the 13ths, then they have to be in February, March and November, unless it's a leap year, in which case they're in January, April and July.
Friday the 13th has an association for many people as being unlucky. For many hundreds of years, people have talked about Friday the 13th as being unlucky.
It had been a quiet day on Wall Street, and then just 2 hours before the closing bell, the market went into a free fall. No one's suggesting that what happened here today on Friday the 13th means that we're in for another Black Monday in 2 days' time. Even so, with the Dow Jones index losing some 7% of its value in just over 2 hours, it's clearly a shock.
If on such a day something happens, something that could happen on any other day, we make the association, the link, that it happened because it was Friday the 13th. On any typical day, there must be thousands of people who sprain their ankle, break a cup, cut themselves, have a bump in the car. How many of them say, oh, that happened to me because it's Tuesday the 22nd? Almost nobody, I would think.
Prince Charles has made a personal gift of several £1000s to the cathedral's restoration fund. Today he came to see progress on restoring the unique statues on the west front. But he had trouble adjusting the strap of the safety helmet, and that's when he struck his head. Prince was obviously stunned and for a moment was unable to continue. An hour later, he was said still to be suffering the effects of the mishap.
The number 13 has dark and sad associations for Christians because when our Lord and his 12 disciples sat down together for their final meal on earth, that was the Last Supper, which was also their Jewish Passover, there were 13 of them in the room. The 13th man was Judas Iscariot, whom Christ sent out on an errand and who then went to the priests and our Lord's other enemies and betrayed him. As a result of that betrayal, Jesus was arrested, and on the following day, the Friday, he was crucified. So when we have an association of Friday and the 13th day of the month, Christians feel that there is an extra shadow over the day.
Friday the 13th is significant to pagans in many ways. It actually comes from 13 full moons a year, and also from the Norse goddess Freya. Hence Freya, which is Norse for Friday, Freya's day sort of thing, and 13 full moons a year. And in reality, it's a lucky time of year, but it's been twisted round by other cultures and other religions that people will have bad luck. And because people are, shall we say, indoctrinated into belief systems when they're young, sadly that's happened to them.
The number 13 throughout the ages has picked up this idea of superstition. It's a bad number, it's got bad karma, but actually it has both positive and negative karma. But some people could be frightened of the number 13, particularly if they're feeling insecure within themselves.
It's fairly well established that entertainers are some of the most superstitious people, and I wanted to find out whether those superstitions would actually influence their performance. So to do that, I took a major international competition, which was the Eurovision Song Contest, and looked back over 30-something years of the contest. And I was interested to see how people who had performed in the 13th position compared to those who performed in the 12th and 14th. With the hypothesis being, if you're drawn 13th, you become very nervous and you don't turn in such a good performance, in which case people drawn in that position should receive lower points than those either side. Looked at the data, lo and behold, that's exactly what I found. The groups that were drawn 13th really didn't do very well over the long haul. And in fact, there's only been a couple of countries that have won from that position. One of them is Norway, and that's the only country in Europe where 13 is consistently considered to be lucky.
The reason why we don't serve a table of 13 here at the Savoy is because back in 1898, Mr. Wolfe Joel booked a table for 14 for a private dinner. Just before the dinner was due to commence, one of the guests cancelled, therefore reducing the party to 13. Mr. Joel laughed at the old superstition where the first person to leave the table would be the first to die. A few weeks later, Mr. Joel was found murdered in his office in Johannesburg. When the management heard about the tragic news of Mr. Joel's death, they decided that from that day forward, a member of staff would join any party of 13 within the Savoy. This proved to be a little bit unpopular, as after the meal, guests felt a little bit awkward to relax and talk about certain topics in front of an unfamiliar person. In the mid-20s, Mr. Basil Ionides was commissioned to create a 3-foot cat. This cat was carved from a single piece of plain tree and was christened Casper. Casper now lives in the high shelf within the Pinaforium with his back to a mirrored wall. When a party of 13 is booked, Casper is placed on the 14th seat, along with a napkin and a full complement of glass, china and crockery. He's then served each course, dish by dish, along with the other guests. For the past 70 years, Casper has not missed a meal where there have been 13 guests present.
I think that us human beings have an irrational side as well as a rational one, and that although men and women who have strong faith in Christ and in the love of God can see that there's no reason to have superstition, and though rational scientists can see no reason for it, I think it's rather like the little insect that lives in the cupboard at the back of our minds and pops its head out every now and again, whether we want it to or not. Superstition appeals to a very deep part of our oldest nature.
I'm actually preparing to do a ritual for those who feel unlucky on Friday the 13th.
Just like I don't celebrate Christmas because I'm a pagan, I've got no fears about Friday the 13th. But it does mean that our home in Hastings in Sussex is actually packed with people banging on the door, asking for help, thinking they're going to have a bad day. And if people believe they're going to have a bad day, they will. But I convince them either through spells, incantations, even counselling, that they can have a good day and they go away happy. I mean, in reality, people should use the number 13 in their lottery because I don't know how many times it comes up, but it's a very lucky number.
My name is Eduardo. We are in Clear Lake, Iowa in the Midwest, and this is my home, and behind me is our backyard.
Brandon, follow me.
On Friday the 13th, I have avoided going out because I was afraid that something terrible would happen to me, or if I could come home and my home be burned to the ground. think of where he could be now. Somewhere on this block. I've had it for a long time, and I've avoided doing a lot of things. I believe it begun slowly, and pretty much like a muscle that you have. The more you use it, the more it grows. So when I first had a problem with Friday the 13th, I probably just thought it was a bad luck day, and I went away, but I was kind of scared that something terrible was going to happen, not just to me, but I may come back home and somebody had a heart attack, and I would say that's because I left them alone on the 13th.
There are some phobias that are culturally defined, and a fear of Friday the 13th is almost certainly one of these. What seems to happen in the context of a phobia of a particular day of the week or associated with a number or a particular object is that it's related to superstition, a culturally defined fear, in other words.
The fear of Friday the 13th is a phobia. A phobia is an excessive, irrational fear. The person understands that their reaction is excessive, but yet they're unable to do much about it. The fear has gone so far that many builders and contractors won't even put a 13th floor on a building. That is, the floor is there, but the elevator will not indicate that there's a 13th floor. Now, as to the specific fear of Friday the 13th, I think that's kind of instilled in culture as well. It's something that many people grow up with, as evidenced by movies like Friday the 13th. And this simply reinforces and perpetuates the idea that perhaps we should fear this date.
Hello. Hi, Dr. Black. How are you?
Hi, Eduardo. Why don't you have a seat, make yourself comfortable. Just thought we'd have a chat today about your fear of the number 13 and Friday the 13th in particular.
If I got a gift from somebody, say a friend gives me a shirt, I'll never wear that shirt because it was on the 13th that I wanted.
Even though it was a nice shirt, a new shirt.
Even though it was a nice shirt or a new shirt, I would just, it would hang in my wardrobe until it got its turn to be thrown away or something.
What did you think might happen if you wore it?
If I saw somebody get run over by a car in the streets, I would kind of blame it on my wearing a shirt that I got on the 13th. Even though I knew that it made no sense to blame myself for somebody getting run over, or just the feeling that it might have been. It just might have been because I'm wearing a shirt that I got on Friday the 13th. Jump on.
Jump on.
And you tell me if you see Zippy, okay? When I was really at my worst, I went with my mom and father in Brazil. We used to take vacations on the weekend. We got to this big hotel in a small town away from Recife, Brazil. And they only have one room available in the hotel, the best hotel there. And the room was the room number was 13. And I told my dad, "Dad, why don't we get another room? This room is number 13. And he thought it was funny, but he was nice to me because he knew I had a problem with the number 13. He said, "Eduardo, it's not going to affect us." 6 months later, my father died. Although I didn't really believe that he died because he stayed in a hotel on Friday the 13th. But the thought would come that he might not have died if he didn't stay on a hotel room, number 13. Zippy, come here. Come here, Zippy. Zippy, good doggy. Come here. Good dog. Zippy, I need to talk to you. Yeah, come here, Zippy. Come on, Zippy. Good doggy, come here. Let's go put leash on. Yeah.
Eduardo's fear of Friday the 13th may stem from cultural fears that he grew up with. He's mentioned that his mother instilled the fear, often in jest, but she would reinforce that. It could also stem from individual factors. Some people are simply more fearful or phobic than others.
The degree of incapacity caused by a phobia can be very variable depending upon the phobia. A person with a fear of going into public places might actually find that that phobia is profoundly incapacitating. If in contrast a person has a phobia such as a phobia of Friday the 13th, then the number of occasions when they will have to address this phobia will be quite few and far between.
Let's say if Friday the 13th was coming up, what would you do? How would you feel?
I would stay home. It bothered me, but I avoided it. I always did avoid it enough so that I didn't have to put up with the anxiety that comes with doing things.
So the idea of Friday the 13th coming up would make you very anxious and nervous and would lead you to alter your behavior to avoid the date?
Yes. There's people who have phobias of worms or cockroaches, and they're phobias, and pretty much like mine. Mine, it is concerning Friday the 13th, and you know that it is an unfounded fear. A worm, or Friday the 13th, or a cockroach, or even a rat, a mouse, they don't really have the power to hurt you, but the phobia is there. And in some people it becomes so strong that it may interfere with their daily living, and that's when you should seek treatment.
If Friday the 13th phobic people come to me because they know I understand where they're coming from. If they went along to anybody else, people would think they're, a little bit loopy. But they do have, friends and family who share the same problems.
Elements earth, of air, of fire, and water, drawn together from every quarter. I beckon thee forth to bring protection, love and harmony for this coming Friday the 13th.
Paganism is about the belief in nature. We're not anti-Christian. We believe in a god and a goddess. It's a science of the mind, not a superstition. And we believe that through positive thought we can make things happen for healing, beneficial things for people. And it's catching on as we head towards the millennium, far quicker than other belief cultures. May it be I add my spirit in perfect love, perfect trust, and perfect joy. Friday the 13th phobics come from all walks of life, ranging from unemployed people to high-class businessmen. People from all over the world actually contact me. I'd say they're normal people, but on Friday the 13th, they seem to go a little bit, almost like the full moon, they go a bit loony.
May it be a lucky day for all concerned. So may it be done!
People who are interested in Friday the 13th, of course, notice the 13s, notice the Fridays. If something nasty happens on Friday the 13th, they'll say, ah, see, I was right. If something nasty happens on another day, they don't say, ah, see, I was wrong. But you do get some rather strange examples, and it's not so easy to dismiss them. The famous one is the Apollo 13 moon mission.
Ignition, flight. Roger.
The Apollo craft had been launched at 13:13 hours. There was an explosion on board on the 13th of April. It was launched from pad 39, which is 3 times 13. Okay, now as soon as you start getting into 39 is 3 times 13, you're now looking for 13s even if they're not there. But the other 13s I gave you are completely genuine.
Booster, how do you look? We look good, fine, we'll go. Okay, fired up. Flat. Okay, Sergeant. It looks fine.
At first sight, the probability of getting all these 13s in the Apollo mission is very low, and you think, gosh, it must be significant because it's so unlikely to happen. But the problem with this is we select that event to talk about because it did happen. As soon as you do that, you're out of the realms of probability and you're into attaching significance to things because they showed a pattern and then saying because of that pattern they're significant. You're going round and round in circles.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. Go, guidance. We've had a hardware restart. I don't know what it was. Okay. Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B bus undervolt. You see an AC bus undervolt there, guidance? Or ECOM? Negative, flight. I believe the crew reported it. And we had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning there.
Nonetheless, it is rather curious that we live in a universe where it was Apollo 13, it was the 13th that it exploded, it was 13 hours that it took off.
The late report says the spacecraft now is operating on battery power alone. All unnecessary equipment is being turned off.
What I'd say about this is 2 things. Firstly, we know why it blew up, and it was nothing to do with 13. It was part of the hardware went wrong. The helium tank exploded. It hadn't been designed properly. If it hadn't been that one, it would have been Apollo 14. It would have been one of them.
Odyssey Houston, standing by, over.
Okay, over.
And the other thing is, the people on board of Apollo 13, they weren't unlucky. They're some of the luckiest people on this planet. They were en route to the moon. Their spaceship blew up, and they still got home. That's luck. That's not bad luck.
I do believe very much there's such a thing as good luck and bad luck. You have the good luck, the wonderful things, the winnings on the lottery, whatever, and you have the bad luck where you can have disaster upon disaster. A lot of people have asked me if I think I'm lucky or unlucky as extremely lucky. I mean, I really do, because I've survived the most incredible accidents. One day does actually stand out in my mind among a lot of eventful sagas. I was going down to Swindon because I had to travel down there every day down the M4, and the silencer fell off my car. So I went to the garage where I always have my cars done in Newbury and borrowed the car. The first car, the fan belt broke. So I borrowed another car from them, and I got about a mile and I had a puncture. So I then went back and I borrowed their last one, which was a Skoda. I did get to work this time, and it was fine till I came out of work when I had a flat battery. Got about 3/4 of the way back to Newbury, and the radiator burst. So I rang the garage and said, help, what am I going to do? So they said, well, we're very sorry, we'll come and get you, we've got your car ready. So they gave me my car back. So I set off from my car and I had a puncture, just as I got back on the M4 again. The AA man was quite familiar with me by this time.
People view luck in many different ways. Lucky people, for them, luck is an internal skill. and they have various rituals to keep that skill in place. So various things they'll do to promote their own luck. For the unlucky people, it's often an external force. They have no control over it, but this force will come in whenever there's some kind of element of chance and steer their life in a negative direction to make certain that they will fail. So for the unlucky people, external; lucky people, internal.
I was driving through Richmond Park and I'd just taken my son to school and I'd heard a very strange noise from the back of my car. So I got out to have a look and see what it was, and I checked all the wheels, couldn't find anything. And as I stood up, a duck fell on my head. And the beak came over and it actually cracked my skull. I've got a lump here from where it hit me. Well, I'd hardly recovered from this. The duck fell forward into my arms when a parks policeman came up. And he tapped me on the shoulder, whipped the duck out of my arms and said, "You can't keep that, madam. It's poaching." So I'm sort of standing there, blood pouring down my face, thinking, what? He then said, "And move your car, please. You're not allowed to stop there." So I sort of staggered back into the car thinking, well, very strange.
Our experiments were concerned with the psychology of luck, and we were interested in looking at psychological differences between people who consider themselves exceptionally lucky and unlucky. We were also open to the notion that maybe there was something paranormal going on here, that lucky people truly were lucky when it came to games of chance, and so we were exploring that notion as well. Touch the screen to indicate whether you think the coin will land heads or tails. Sorry, it's tails. And now over to the lab. We found there was nothing paranormal going on, that when it came to games of chance, lucky people and unlucky people were not performing any differently. But there's a lot of very interesting psychology. When people were looking back over their lives, they're often remembering events that were consistent with how they saw themselves. Lucky people remembering positive events, unlucky ones negative events. When they're interpreting events that happen to them on a daily basis, lucky people always looking on the bright side, unlucky ones not. And when it came to the future, the lucky people were the extreme optimists. Everything was going to go well. The unlucky people, extreme pessimists, their lives were going to be a complete failure.
There are things to really consider, I think, about my luck on that particular day. I spent 8 weeks on the spinal unit at Pinderfields Hospital in Wakefield, where there were perhaps 40, 50 people in there. There was one lady left hospital shortly after I arrived, and she could walk, but the rest of the people in there who had broken their backs would never walk again. I can walk, and no long-lasting effects. All in all, I think I'm a lucky chap.
Touch the screen to indicate whether you think the coin will land heads or tails. Many people see luck as a kind of trivial concept and say, why on earth were you studying it scientifically? But for lots of people in our experiment, luck played a major part in their lives. And so, for example, if you thought you were unlucky and Friday the 13th was your unlucky day, you simply didn't go out the house. If you had an unlucky number and the bus that came along had that number on it, you wouldn't get on it. So it's not as though these were trivial beliefs. They really were impacting upon people's lives. Sorry, it's tails.
I've always been eventful since I was a small child. My mum used to say when the hospital rang, "Oh yes, what has she done this time? Which ward is she in? Oh yes, well I'll come and visit her." So really and truthfully, ever since I've been small, once I got motorised, then things became slightly more dramatic. I went to Yorkshire to collect some archives because I used to be in charge of microfilming. And I'd picked up some photographs from a company up there, and I put them in the back of the car. It was actually getting dark, because as usual my cars are broken down, that sort of thing, is before I got there. And I was driving along, and I suddenly looked in my mirror, and I saw this horned head looking at me. I nearly drove into the ditch, actually. I thought, what? And a goat had got into the back of the car. How, I do not know. And it was very happily, thank God, only eating the wrappings of some of the paper boxes that I had there. It was really finding the cardboard very tasty. I had to get it out without, of course, damaging the photographs and negatives, but it was really very happy, thank you. And then I got it out, and it was extremely smelly because the goat had problems in the back of the office car, so I was not popular when I took it back.
There may just be one way in which Friday the 13th is actually unlucky, truly unlucky. And that is that if you are very acutely aware that Friday the 13th is a very unlucky day in your own mind, then that's going to distract you. You're going to be consciously aware of Friday the 13th. You're going to be aware that Friday the 13th is going to be an unlucky day. Because you're distracted, you won't necessarily be paying as much attention to the tasks you're engaged in, driving your car, doing things around the house, things you're engaged in at work. And as a result, you may actually make it slightly more likely, because of your inattentiveness, that you'll be engaged in an accident or some incident.
When people are not using their energies properly, or when they are losing energy to everything else, I think that they affect what is going on around them, and they can cause things to happen. When I'm in control of my energy, I live a much less eventful life, and I think this is the cause of a lot of problems for people. There is a lot of superstition about Friday the 13th, of course, and the problems that people have that go wrong, etc. If you are splashing energy about, and if you're expecting things to go wrong, then you will cause that to happen. I don't actually believe in Friday the 13th, probably because I have such a terribly eventful life anyway, and if I'm containing my energy fields, things don't happen to me, particularly on Friday the 13th.
The fear of Friday the 13th is fairly widespread, at least in the U.S. Often people who have phobias respond to that fear by developing avoidance behavior, so they'll take great lengths to avoid exposure or contact with that specific day. Eduardo, for example, describes how he would withdraw. He would stay in his home. He wouldn't leave it. He wouldn't go out shopping. He wouldn't want to meet new individuals. And that's how he responded to that fear. And that is fairly typical.
Well, if you just avoid doing things on the 13th, then you're yielding, you're giving into the fear, and you won't, the effects will be probably that you're upset because you didn't do something, just because it is Friday the 13th. In my case, I'll be very nervous, full of doubts about why I decided to go shopping on such a day and not wait until the next day. Zippy stay, Zippy stay. Okay, Zippy does not have a fear of anything, no phobias.
What does Friday the 13th mean to me? On a personal level, it's a day I'd rather do without. It's a day I'd rather stay at home. It's a day I'm glad to see gone. Those are the main things it means to me. It's something I don't like, feel uncomfortable. I think that'll always stay with me to a certain degree.
I don't believe in fate or luck to any great extent, I think. We have to live by the consequences of those decisions. A simple decision of getting into a Land Rover when somebody offered me a lift led to a particular consequence, but I don't believe that it was fated to happen. I think that it just did happen.
I'm not fearful of Friday the 13th. It can be a great day because 13 goes into a 4, which is to do with materialising things, getting things done, and bringing things down to earth, if anything. And the number 5 brings movement where things are stuck. So although it can be a bit precarious, the two numbers together, 5 is for communication. Could be a great day for communicating, a 13 with a 5.
Well, for me personally, Friday the 13th wouldn't mean anything because I'm just not superstitious. I'm very keenly interested in superstition as a folklorist and as an investigator, but I will cheerfully walk under ladders or eat the 13th piece of cake with impunity.